Hey guys, C2 here with a Hearthstone World Championships prediction video for you today. In case you didn't know, the brackets, or at least the groups, came out yesterday. They came out on the Battle.net website for Blizzard, so if you want to go check that out yourself, I will put the link on this screen and in the description below. So this is going to be me predicting who will win each match and therefore who will advance to the finals, as you can see on the screen. But before that, we should go over the specific groups. And as you look through the groups, first and foremost, you'll notice that, if you pay attention, is that there is one champion slotted right here, and of their respective region, and one runner-up of the respective region right here, and then the other players finished in fourth. And that's kind of the benefit of having the championships go the way they were, as opposed to last year where they went to a top four and then everything was finished. So in this way, they're able to kind of balance out the groups a lot better. And at least looking on Twitter, a lot of people are pretty pleased with the groups. There's no one group of death like last year when we had Strivecrow and Colento face off in the very first match. And generally, we like to see the best players move on and go in the finals, and then face off in the finals rather than knocking out each other early. So it's always good to get nice and even groups out there. So with that said, let's go on to looking at these groups. And Group A, it's going to be Tice, who is the EU champion, facing off against No Tomorrow from China. And by the way, there were four regions. It was Europe, China, Asia Pacific, and Americas. So yeah, we have those two, and then we have Kano, the Japanese player, who's the runner-up from the Asia Pacific region, and Jab from the Americas. Group B is Kranich, the champion of the Asia Pacific. He's from Korea, and Life Coach, who comes from the EU region. Zoro, the runner-up from China, and Nias, I still don't know how to pronounce his name because they flip-flop back and forth on the actual broadcast as well, but he is from the Americas. Group C, Love is from China. He's the champion from there. Oskaka coming from Europe. Hot Form is the runner-up from the Americas. And Nilio, the Vietnamese player who comes from the Asia-Pacific region. And finally, in Group D, we have Purple, who was the champion of the Americas region, facing off against Ping Ping Ho, who's a Taiwanese player coming from the Asia-Pacific region, obviously. Nairia, the runner-up from the Europe region, and Diemeng, also known as Jihao, also known as Weixing when we casted him. By the way, his name Diemeng means butterfly dream, and with all the other Chinese players, Zoro, Love, and No Tomorrow having English names, I feel like he should just go with Butterfly Dream, because that's awesome. Just like how Tiddler Celestial, he has I think a different name in Chinese, or different. He has his own pronunciation in Chinese, but I mean Tiddler Celestial is so awesome. I think Diemeng should just suck it up and go with Butterfly Dream, because that would be absolutely amazing. Anyway, I digress. So he is going to be the player, or the last player from China. Now, I mentioned before that people overall that there wasn't really a group of death. I would tend to, if I had to pick one group of death, or at least the hardest group, I would have to go with Group D. And the reason is because I feel like Purple is head and shoulders above the rest of the Americas qualifiers. I feel like he's in other regions, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to decide who's the best player. Maybe the only exception would be from the Asia Pacific, where I think Kranich, he steamrolled basically the Asia Pacific Championships, and I believe he's the best player from there. But other than that, it's hard to kind of name the best player from each specific region. And for instance, in each group, there's a very, very strong Europe player, because basically 4 of the top players in the world advanced from Europe, which is hard. I mean, whether it's luck, or whether it's a sign of their skill is one thing, but I mean, the facts remain that basically the top 4 players in the world are those EU finishers. So basically, however you split it up, they're going to be very, very good. And the fact that Purple is one of the best makes a big difference. Following that, I think Diemeng is probably the best Chinese player, even though he didn't win the China group. or not the China group, the China Championship. I do, just watching his games, I did cast all of the Chinese matches. You can find that on this channel if you just go to the playlist and you'll find it. And yeah, just from watching the play, it felt like he was one of the strongest players, if not the strongest player from China. And then lastly, Ping Ping Ho is a very, very solid player in his own right. So if I had to pick one group that was the group of death, so to speak, I would say Group D. All right, so let's go to those predictions. Actually, before we talk about the predictions, I want a few more things. When I go through these predictions, I'm going to be calling certain players strong, certain players weak. If you're one of the players watching this, or if you're someone who's rooting for those players, don't take offense because everything is relative, obviously. Every single one of these players had to get through a huge amount of, competitors, had to win a huge amount of matches. It's extremely unlikely that any of them are actually, bad at Hearthstone. And in fact, I've watched all of their matches, so I know they're at least very, very solid at the very worst. When I call someone weak, it's in relation to the rest of these players, and in relation to some of these players who are ridiculously strong in the grand scheme of things. So please don't take offense when I call people weak or something like that. The next thing to talk about is the effect of the Patron nerf. We might see Patron at the World Championships, but I highly doubt it. And the reason is because since it's nerf, obviously there's people who have been able to take it high on ladder, but since it's nerf, it has some really, really polarized and bad matchups, essentially. Like, it used to be unfavored versus handlock, now it's really just absolutely horrible against handlock, things like that. Just a bunch of matchups that used to be reasonable, but that now are absolutely terrible. There's certain matchups that actually arguably got better, one of them being like Druid, for instance, because sometimes you get the Warsong Commander stuck in your hand, and it's really not a card that's too useful against the Druid, because you don't really want to be charging into their guys anyway, because typically they have more than 2 health, and definitely more than 1 health. So having your guys charge in isn't a big deal. The bigger deal is being able to get your patrons on turn 5, and the Druid just can't deal with it. Generally stuff like that. But other than the patron not being there, the bigger deal is that with patron gone, obviously aggro has made a big comeback, and because of that, Druid isn't quite as strong. So strangely enough, because of the nerf from patron, you might see a lot less Druid. Of the qualifiers, of the 16 qualifiers, 12 of them brought Druid and 11 brought Patron to the regional championships, their respective regional championships. So that's obviously a huge deal, especially for those players who are trying to win. And in particular, just to give a few examples, Life Coach is someone who likes to, or has a very specific set of classes that he likes to play. You saw in the Archon Team League that a lot of the more difficult decks were relegated to RDU, for instance, or even sometimes Tice. And for instance, what am I looking at? Oskaka. For instance, Oskaka can play pretty much any deck, so that doesn't really affect him quite as much as it would someone like Life Coach. Looking at someone like Kno, he specifically brought a lineup to counter Druid. He brought Midrange Paladin, Tempo Mage, and Druid, so that all of his decks were at least 50-50 or better against Druid, something that he specifically decided to do both at the Japan regionals, or the Japan qualifier for the Asia Pacific Championships, and at the Asian Pacific Championships themselves. So it's a situation where if he feels like less players are going to be bringing Druid because of the patron nerf, then that could affect his strategy as well. So a lot of things to think about for these players going into it, and has a slight impact on the predictions that I'm going to be making. And the final thing I want to say before I go to the predictions is that some of these predictions I'm more confident than others. Some of them are really, really close, and it's basically just flipping a coin. Others, I feel really confident about who's going to win. Obviously, as confident as you can be, it's still Hearthstone. There's still a little bit of luck involved. Even if I feel like one player is much stronger than the other and will win in normal circumstances, there is the case that, the weaker player gets the best possible starting hand, 3 games in a row, which is about a 5% or so chance, give or take, of happening. So it happens occasionally. Um, Obviously, I like to argue that the stronger player will win the vast majority of the time. But things can happen. It's not quite like tennis or basketball where tennis you're not going to see some guy hit you know 24 lead court shots in a row and just dribble over and win. It's just not that the chances of that happening are way lower than 5%. So just when I go through these, obviously I'm more confident in others. I will tell you which ones I'm more confident in, and hopefully I do a good job with this, and hopefully I don't make too many people mad with my predictions. In any case, I've been talking a long time. Let's get right onto it. Group A, starting out with Tice versus No Tomorrow. Now, at their respective regional championships, Tice brought Patron Warrior, Demon Handlock, and Druid. And I'm going to be saying Druid. Obviously, there's faster Druid, there's more aggro Druid that you see in the ladder right now. But at the championships, at the respective championships, everyone who brought Druid brought some form of mid-range Druid. It wasn't ramp, it wasn't aggro. So, oh wait. There's one exception. The one exception is Ping Ping Ho. That's the one exception of a player who brought a little bit of faster Druid. But other than that, everyone brought mid-range Druid. And so anyway, going back to Tice. Those decks were basically deemed the strongest decks at the time. It's arguable whether that's still the case. And Tice was really smart too. He really read the meta. He knew that the people from EU were most likely going to bring very slow, or bring these specific decks, and in particular slower decks, not super aggro. So he put 2 BGHs in his Druid, and obviously it worked out well for him because he won the EU championships. So anyway, going on to No Tomorrow, he brought mid-range Paladin, with a little bit more aggro focus. Had Argent Squires and Abusive Sergeants in there, but he also had Murloc Knights and Quartermasters. Also brought Face Hunter and Patron Warrior. One thing to note about the China Championships that again you can see on my channel, shameless plug, is that they were played at the end of August, and they were played about a week after TGT came out. I think it was around there. It was right after TGT came out, so they had very little time to kind of prepare and see how the meta would shake up. There wasn't much time to kind of play on ladder and see how things goes. I mean, everyone was obviously still experimenting. I mean, we saw a lot of totem shamans, and that's something that would have never. I'm pretty sure no one brought totem shaman to the EU or NA championships. So that's something to keep in mind, that the decks that they had at their respective championships, or the decks that they had at the China championships, probably less indicative of what they're going to be bringing at the World Championships. So in any case, No Tomorrow, he advanced really quickly. He was top 8 in the points for China, and all he had to do, he got a straight bye to the championships, and all he had to do is win one match in the winners bracket. He went straight to groups, and then from groups he won 2 matches and then qualified right away. So basically he won 3 matches. So out of all the players here, he probably had to play the fewest matches out of anyone to get through, with the exception, I think, of Diemong. But yeah, everyone else had to play the regional qualifiers, whether they got top 8 or not, and then from there had to play many more matches once they got to the regional championships. Well, I guess Tice qualified pretty quickly as well once he got to the championships. In any case, I'm going to be favoring Tice for this one. I know tomorrow he qualified right away. I guess the point I was trying to make is he qualified right away, but since then he's been struggling quite a bit. I casted him playing in the Celestial Championship Series, and he didn't show quite the good play that I was expecting. And meanwhile, Tice is in contention for the best player in the world. He mentioned in his interview in Liquid Hearth that he's going to be having a bit of trouble adjusting after the Patron nerf, because of the 3 classes that were the strongest in the meta happened to be the 3 decks that he was the best at. But I have confidence in him being able to adjust, and I've already received signs that he's definitely studying No Tomorrow a lot. Even though the brackets were just released yesterday, he is going to be looking for those VODs, and there's a few out there for No Tomorrow. So gonna go for with Tice for this one. Pretty confident about it. And let's go on to the next matchup, which is Kno versus Jab, and at their respective championships, Kano brought mid-range Paladin, Tempo Mage, and Druid, and again that was kind of targeting Druid. And Jab brought Druid, Midrange Hunter, and Tempo Mage, which was a pretty risky choice at the time, considering Patron was pretty strong, especially with the Midrange Hunter. But Midrange Hunter is one of his strongest decks. This is actually a really close matchup. I don't think people realize how good of a player Kano is. Obviously, I'm a bit biased because he's from Japan. But both players, very good ladder players. Every time I sign on, they're both my friends on Battle.net. Every time I sign on, they're top 20, if not top 10, in the rankings or in Legend. And it's really close. Overall, I'm going to go with Jab because he seemed a little bit more comfortable. He played in the regional championships last year, and he just seems very comfortable. Whereas Kano, he was tweeting that he had interviews where he said he was like actually shaking and super nervous in his matches. So just the experience there, even though Jab hasn't been to World Championships before. I mean, none of these players have other than Kranich, but Jab more experience in that regard. So I'm gonna go with him to move on. In the winners bracket here, again, by the way, Jab and Kano, it's not a prediction that I'm very confident with. So going on, Tice versus Jab. Again, Jab. I feel like he might be pretty predictable. And when Tice does his research, I feel like he might be able to, counter those picks, even though he's not guaranteed to play against him. Jab has brought more or less the same decks this entire time, and then even though Tice is kind of the same way, I feel like he's able to counter people with his particular brand of play. That said, Jab is a very good player, but in the end, I'm going to go with the Europe Championship. The Europe champion. Gonna go with Tice to move on and advance to the finals, or at least the final 8, and Jab to fall down to the decider match. In the elimination match, again, I feel like Kano is a pretty strong player, and No Tomorrow has been kind of disappointing me lately, so I'm going to go with Kano to take that match, which sets up a rematch between Kano and Jab. And Kano, with the experience of having won one game, I'm going to go with Kano here. I know it sounds crazy. I'm picking Jab in one, picking Kano in the other. If you were noticing, I set this up perfectly so that I could go with the homer pick in the decider match. And going to go with Kano here. Not sure if Kano is going to go with the same plan of countering Druid, but if he does decide to do so, and Jab does bring Druid, that could be what allows Kano to win the match. Again, because this Kano and Jab match, I really don't know who to pick. I decided to go with one for the first one, and the other for the other one. And since I'm a homer, and obviously I'm I'm half Japanese, half American, but there's 4 players from the Americas in the championships. There's one Japanese guy. Let's go with the Japanese guy. So going to be, my picks are Tice and Kano to get out of this group. And let's go on to Group B, where we have Kranich, Life Coach, Zoro, and Nias, or Nias, I still don't know. And this particular group, I think, is one of the weaker groups, actually. In particular, again, disclaimer, don't get too mad. I feel like Zoro and Nias are probably some of the weaker players in the World Championships. And in particular, Zoro, probably one of the weaker runner-ups. He's a reasonable player. I mean, he's reasonably okay, but he kind of got through by the skin of his teeth. I mean, a lot of the players did so as well, but he was always in some sort of elimination match, always down match point, and that's one thing to be a little bit afraid of as far as when you're playing him. You can never count him out. He's kind of always somehow finds a way to get back in, but as far as his play is concerned, it's a little bit weaker than some of the other players I've seen. And again, I mentioned before that Life Coach might have a little bit of trouble adjusting, since he put a lot of effort into perfecting Patron Warrior. So with that said, with Kranich and Life Coach going at it, I think that will hurt Life Coach a bit. Kranich, one of the best players in the world at the moment, having steamrolled through the Asia Pacific Championships. He is my pick to win this match. I forgot to mention what they played. Kranich played Druid, mid-range Paladin, and mid-range Hunter. He was playing Patron at the Korea qualifiers, but he decided to switch it up because he realized that some of the people in the Asia Pacific Championships were specifically targeting Patron in their lineup, so he decided not to mess around and play Patron and switch it up. Life Coach going with Druid, Patron, and Midrange Hunter at the Europe Championships. So gonna go with Krenich here to move on. And in match 2, Zoro going against Nias, and I actually forgot who I picked here. Anyway, let's just go over their decks. Zoro with Druid, Midrange Paladin, and Zoo at the China Championships, whereas Nias went with Midrange Hunter, Demon Handlock with the Refreshment Vendors rather than the Twilight Drakes to make that happen, and the Tempo Mage. Again, Zoo was kind of an interesting pick for Zoro. Nowadays, Zoo is a little bit stronger because of the fact that they don't have the Patron matchup to worry about, and obviously Handlock, that was one of the reasons why it was such a popular pick in the first place. In this one, I'm just going to have to go with Zoro, unfortunately for Nias, because Zoro just never freaking dies. And Nias showed a little bit. I mean, he was a very solid player, but in particular, the Handlock versus Handlock matchup, obviously that's not a matchup that, I mean, it's somewhat unlikely that that matchup will come up against Zoro. But I felt like he kind of stuck to a strategy of never attacking his opponent, and there was really no nuance. He ended up winning that match, but he almost let his opponent back into the game in that matchup. And I feel like at the very, very top level, you can make more nuanced decisions than deciding to never attack your opponent ever. So, gonna go with Zoro for that one. He kind of just never dies. So he's gonna move on to the winners matchup to go against Krenich, where again I feel like Krenich is just simply stronger than Zoro, so Krenich going to win that one. Life Coach against Nias. Again, Nias is going to probably be playing a little bit slower decks. Obviously, he had the Temple Mage working for him, but I think Life Coach is going to be able to prevail in that one, despite the difficulties that he might have in this new meta. And in the decider match, going to go with Life Coach over Zoro. Again, you know, Zoro has 9 lives, never dies, but I feel like Life Coach is simply too strong for him in the in-game decision department. And so I'm picking Krenich to be your first player out, followed by Life Coach. One thing to consider is that because this is one of the weaker groups, I feel like, I think Life Coach, had he been a different group, he might not have made it out. And spoiler alert, before I go to my last group, I guess I could mention this since I'm going kind of harping on this point. I do pick all EU players to get out of the groups, whether they come in first or second. And I feel like if he had been placed in a different group, he might not have made it out, in particular something like Group D. So, going to move on to Group C. Oh, did I say? I think I did say what they played. Nice played Midrange Hunter, Demon Handlock, and Temple Mage. Yeah, I did say that. Okay. Alright. So next, going on to Group C, where we had the China champion Love going off against Ostkaka. Love brought Zoo, Midrange Paladin, and Patron, whereas Ostkaka brought Patron, Dragon Priest, and Druid. Part of the reason why Ostkaka brought Dragon Priest was in order to counter his teammate Hoei at the Europe Championships. He brought that because he knew that Hoei would bring things like Secret Paladin and Hunter, stuff like that. And the Dragon Priest is great against that. It's also pretty good against Druid, so he felt confident that he could maybe snipe off the Druid in other matchups, which was going to be heavily seen, obviously, at the Europe Championships. And in this matchup, I think that Ostkaka, despite not getting first or second EU region, he's simply too strong. And if you look at his interview for Liquid Hearth, he did a crazy amount of preparation for his matches there, and I feel like he's going to do the same thing for this match. And I feel like he's going to do a bunch of preparation, and his in-game decision making is some of the best in the world. He's an extremely smart player from talking to him. Not even just watching him, just talking to him in person. His thinking is very advanced. So, gonna go with Ostkaka over Love. Love is a solid player, but we'll go with he's solid, and Ostkaka is very, very good. We'll go with the reason for that. Matchups aside, obviously it's hard to predict what kind of decks they're going to bring, because they can they could bring decks that would surprise people and completely counter the current meta that they see. Something that Firebat was really good at doing was bringing things like Freeze Mage to go against what he thought was kind of like a hole in the meta, or a gap in the, or places that people weren't really looking to gain an advantage, in which he could. But so I feel like that's going to be a huge deal, and so it's hard to pick. It's hard to look at their decks that they brought at the respective regional championships. I'm just saying that, telling you them to give you a better idea what kind of decks they like to play potentially. But we could definitely see anything. So it's kind of hard to look at their decks and see who counters what. So I'm going basically off their play, if you haven't noticed so far. Anyway, going on to Hot Form versus Neilio. Neilio, a little bit shaky. Hot Form I felt like played pretty well. Had a couple of iffy moments there as well. Hot Form bringing Patron, Druid, and Temple Mage to the Americas Championships, whereas Neilio brought the standard Druid, Demon Handlock, and Patron. And I just feel like Hot Form's a little bit more solid. This is slightly... not the most. It's just slightly confident. It's not completely confident. I'm pretty confident with this Ostkaka over Love pick. Slightly confident. I didn't tell about my confidence level earlier. I'm slightly confident with Kranich over Life Coach. Not so confident about this one. And Kranich, I'm pretty confident. I'm very confident actually in this matchup versus whoever wins this. And then in this matchup, Life Coach slightly confident, and then Life Coach slightly confident again. In both ones. So as far as my confidence rating in those matches, so yeah, Hot Form slightly confident over Neilio, and again, so Ostkaka going off against Hot Form. Ostkaka is just too good. I'm pretty confident he'll beat Hot Form and be the first person advancing to the finals. And then in this match of Neilio versus Love, I feel like Love is just a more solid player. And slightly confident about that one, about going over Neilio. And then decider, we're going to be going Love versus Hot Form. This is kind of a toss-up. Both players are pretty solid. Not, I don't think they're kind of world champion material, but they're both really solid, and so I'm not confident about this at all. Coin flip, we're going to give one of these to Love because I'm not picking any other Chinese players. So we're going to go with Love for this one to be the second person to advance. Honestly, it's pretty much a coin flip. And Love is pretty solid, so I'm going to go with him. Alright, now to Group D, which is the proverbial group of death, even though, you could disagree. It's not completely obvious like last year. But match number 1, we have Purple versus Ping Ping Ho, Purple being the Americas champion. And he brought Patron with the BGH in his deck, which allowed him to more or less counter Handlock, just with that one BGH, having that one card to just remove a card, just that huge swing, and be able to gain himself more time and set up his combos was really, really important for beating Handlock. But that was a really cool decision by him. Anyway, he brought Patron, Druid, and Demon Handlock, pretty much the standard, other than the BGH. And for Ping Ping Ho, the only person to advance using Shaman, brought an interesting kind of hybrid-y type Shaman with things like Power Mace and Anoya-chan, but also kind of a mid-rangey aspect to it as well. It's a deck that did reasonable against Patron Warrior. And then he also brought Patron Warrior and Druid, so other than that, pretty standard. In this matchup, I think Purple is just way too strong. Ping Ping Ho, again, pretty solid, but Purple is really, really good. So I'm going to go with Purple to advance to the winner's bracket. In the second match, Nairia versus Diamong, our butterfly dream. And so Nairia brought Druid, Patron, Demon Handlock, pretty standard to the EU Championships, got second there. Diamong going with Midrange Paladin, Midrange Hunter, and Patron Warrior that he brought to the China Championships. By the way, I'm confident about this matchup. So anyway, Nairia going against Diamong is going to be... I think Nairia has the slight edge here, and gonna go with him. So slightly confident about that. Diamong is pretty solid. I saw him for a while, but Nairia is just extremely strong. I feel like Nairia is one of the more underrated players, especially amongst the media, just to call a couple people. But I feel like he's very strong and just hasn't been recognized for it yet. In the winners match, I'm going to just go out on a limb and go with Nyria. I feel like it's pretty close. Nyria is very strong, so it's purple. And, you know, got to pick an upset here and there. I'm not very confident about this one. I think it's pretty much a toss-up. So going to go with Nyria to be the first one to advance. And then in the elimination match, it's going to be Ping Ping Ho versus Diemeng. I think Diemeng's a little more solid than Ping Ping Ho. Going to be Diemeng to be able to advance there. Not advance, but go to the decider match. And I'm slightly confident about that one. And the decider match is going to be purple against Diemeng. And again, I think purple is just too good. I'm somewhere being slightly confident. Well, I'll just say slightly confident because Diemeng is a pretty good player. So I'm going to go with purple to advance to the finals in that second spot. So all that said, okay, it's kind of off there on the screen, it looks like. Okay, gonna scroll down a bit. Let's see if that fixes it. Yeah, it looks fine. Okay. All right. So looking at this, we don't actually have where they're going to be slotted in, so I can't give predictions about who's going to advance in each round from there. The players that I have advancing, if you haven't been paying attention, are Tice, Kano, Kranich, Life Coach, Ostkaka, Love, Nyria, and Purple. And as far as the players that I feel like are the favorites to win the championship are, I would say, Tice, Ostkaka, and Purple of Nyria, one of those two. And maybe Dark Horse championship contenders will be Kranich, Life Coach, and the other one of Nyria and Purple. So there you have it. Those are my predictions. Sorry I can't predict to the very end. I guess I should probably pick a champion just because I kind of have to. We'll go with Tice. Why not? Best won the hardest region, won the EU championships, and a ton of really ridiculously good players coming from there. So just gonna say Tice, gonna go with the safe pick. Obviously any of these players can win the championship. Any of the players that I picked to get in the top 8, I have a hard time seeing some of these players winning the championship, but I think yeah, I think out of everyone that I saw, or everyone that I picked going to the top 8, I feel like all of them have a chance to win the championship with some good old Hearthstone RNG. Anyway, those are my picks. I hope you liked this video. If you did, make sure you click the like button and subscribe to my channel, and see you guys next time.